Hey guys, welcome back. Week 9's now in the books, and again, some more crazy moments this week. We had Devontae Smith's catch in the end zone. We had the knee, but he had the one-handed catch there. We had possibly the catch of the year with Garrett Wilson, where he looked like Air Jordan in the end zone there. We had the Addison catch, where it looked like from one angle it was two hands, but then you turn the angle around, it's like, oh, he actually caught that with one hand. That's pretty impressive. And then, of course, the best play of the night, the most sick play of the night, was Saquon Barkley. For those who didn't see it, he caught the ball, did a few moves, turned around, knew the guy was behind him, and jumped in the air. The guy missed it completely, but he jumped in the air backwards. He turned and jumped backwards, basically. It was sick. It was awesome. If you haven't had a chance to go watch it, go watch that. It was beautiful. But I mean, like I said, crazy week this week. It's always going to be crazy, especially with Week 10 coming up. Can't wait. But before we get to Week 10, let's check on what happened in our world of our fantasy league. All right, going over the matchups here for this week. Oh, no, that's the wrong week. Haha. Okay, going over the matchups for this week, we had America defeating Big Papa 147.49 to 103.61. Going over the players, Dak Prescott did get hurt in that game. It looked like, from what it saw, it looked like it was a hand issue because like they were showing the hand where like he was getting stitched up or doing something, but then they came out later and said it was a hamstring issue and he's going to miss multiple weeks. But on that, like he was doing fine. It looks like 133 yards, a touchdown, 3 for 30 on the ground, and I mean, yes, a few sacks, but 11.32 fantasy points was pretty solid at that time. Connor rushed for 100 yards against the Bears, 107 yards, got the bonus for 1 point, and then 3 reception for 12 yards for 15.90 fantasy points, which is kind of like the Cardinals itself. Like just looking at the Cardinals real quick, the Cardinals are actually leading that division. That was not on my bingo card. I thought they were going to be in last place by this point, but hey, NFL, it's silly. And then for Aaron Jones, looks like 21 carries for 64 yards, 4 receptions for 18 yards, for 12.20 fantasy points, and the win over Indy. Buffalo's defense was pretty good. So seeing like 4 for 80 for 12 points, I mean, yes, his schedule is still pretty hard to start the year, but they're still getting in the kinks of things. But it's a good game all around. Very good game to watch. And then Olave, 1 for 13, but took a pass over the middle, got hurt with the second concussion of the year. I'm assuming he's going to be out for multiple weeks. I wonder if they'll pull the same stunt that they did with Tua and just IR him for 4 weeks, just to make sure everything's good. Like I said, second concussion this year. But they'll see on that. I mean, it's also new. There's going to be a new coach involved, so that might, if he does come back, he may keep him towards the line of scrimmage. Who knows? But we'll see. I'll have to keep an eye on that. And then Hunter Henry, at this point, I mean, 7 for 56, 12.60 fantasy points. Tennessee was really good against the tight ends. But it seems like Hunter Henry at this point should be startable the rest of the way. Jaden Reed against Detroit's defense, 5 for 113, 17.30 fantasy points. Bouncing back from the couple games that he had. Aubrey, despite what went on, he finished with 9 points with a couple field goals and an extra point. And then Minnesota's defense with 10.99 fantasy points. And then for America, Kirk Cousins, it was basically, they talked about this week Kirk Cousins versus Mike Zimmer, and Kirk Cousins won that matchup. 222 yards, 3 touchdowns, 4 carries for negative 11 yards, probably sacks really, and then a couple sacks here, but 22.78 fantasy points. Jonathan Taylor, I thought would have a better game against Minnesota, but 48 yards and 3 receptions for 11 yards for 8.90 fantasy points. And then Kamara. Kamara had himself a day. It's Carolina, so you gotta go. You gotta like torch him, Carolina. 29 carries for 155 yards. And then they started getting more receptions after Olave went off the field. So 6 for 60 there for 28.50 fantasy points. I still think it's going to happen where Kamara's going to eat, even it doesn't matter what coach is there. Mooney, it was more after London got hurt after his touchdown catch that he started to get more. 5 for 88 and a touchdown for 19.80 fantasy points. Puka, 1 for 11, got himself ejected for throwing a punch, so 2.10 fantasy points. Cade Otton, Baker Mayfield's number one target until Mike Evans gets back, but had a lot here. And then 8 for 77 and a touchdown for 21.70 fantasy points. And then Kareem Hunt had himself a pretty good game against Tampa's run defense. Usually against Tampa, you want to pass against them. But in this case, which they did. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins had himself a game, which I'm sure we'll get to later. But then Kareem Hunt, 106 yards, touchdown, reception, 11 yards, 19.70 fantasy points, including the touchdown in the overtime game, which I actually saw while I was on Facebook. Like sometimes they'll ESPN will post something, ESPN Fantasy, or post something about a team losing by like a point or something like that. One of the guys lost on the last play of the game due to Kareem Hunt scoring the touchdown. And the first thing I think it was like, man, I know that feeling. I mean, my team, the first week of the season, lost to David Montgomery on the last play of his touchdown, or on the last play of the game in overtime on his touchdown. So, but I mean, hey, that's fantasy football for you. And then Justin Tucker, I mean, almost missed the one kick during the game, but I mean, he still nailed both of his field goals. Like, he's got 5 extra points, 11 fantasy points. Definitely having an off season, but like I said, everyone does. I mean, Mason Crosby, I'll use a great example. Mason Crosby, Chris Boswell. I already went over those last week, but if you wanna hear my thoughts on it, you can watch last week's video. And then Cincinnati Bengals with 13 fantasy points. And then in this matchup, Ricky Bobby beat Hot Pockets, so 145.03 to 106.88. For Ricky Bobby, Joe Burrow had himself a game. You definitely want to pass on Las Vegas, and that's what he did. I mean, 251 yards, pretty good, but 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. He had 3 carries for 11 yards in the sack. But Joe Burrow looked like Joe Burrow. And definitely looked for Chase a lot. And then Achane. Buffalo's defense was pretty good against the run as well. But, I mean, with Tua's back, Achane's basically goes to that unstoppable force, basically. And we could see that here. 12 carries, 63 yards at a touchdown, and then catching 8 receptions out the backfield for 58 yards and a touchdown as well. I mean, who's more deadly, Achane or Tyreek Hill? Everyone's going to say Tyreek Hill. So as far as I know, Achane's going to get those carries. Tracy, Washington's defense, 16 carries, 66 yards, and then the reception for 3 yards. Got a good amount of volume, I would think. Daniel Jones to throw the touchdown pass, that probably was going to Tracy. But the touchdown was probably going to Tracy. But that's crazy, though. I know Daniel Jones is not in anyone's starting lineups. I mean, if it was, then again, check another bingo card. Like, not seeing that. But Daniel Jones hadn't thrown a touchdown pass at home in like 2 years. And that's a crazy stat to think about. That means the Chiefs won 2 Super Bowls during that time. And even the one stat, I don't know, I think it was like 6 for 7. He had 0 yards passing and 1 touchdown. That's also crazy stat. That's just nuts. You can't even huh? But and then Cooper Kupp, 11 for 104, definitely benefited after Puka Nacua was ejected from the game. 22.40 fantasy points. Great game too. I thought it was going to be over. Seattle came back, tied it up, and then go to overtime. And then Demarcus Robinson, that was a good catch too. He's basically was smothered and caught it one-handed. And then Drake London again, 2 for 27, a touchdown, was on pace to have a dominant game before the injury. I'm sure he'll be fine. Brock Bowers, Cincinnati. You want to pass like when it comes. You want the tight end position basically against Cincinnati, and that's what they did. It didn't look like it at first, but then they started getting to it more, and then the touchdown as well. But 5 for 45 and that touchdown for 15.50 fantasy points. McLaurin, again, weird stat. I mean, he had 2 catches, 19 yards, and 2 touchdowns for 15.90 fantasy points. I think he had the same amount of points or around the same amount of points. I think he had like 3-4 receptions the last game. I'm not going to look it up, but and then Younghoe Koo, all he did that game was just nail all of his extra points. Here we go. And then Denver's defense against Baltimore. I thought that was going to be a sneaky play too. I'm in that boat too, because Lamar Jackson basically hurt most of the week. You don't know if he's going to play, and then he comes out and plays. It's like, okay, get Denver's defense. He may not be 100%. They can stop the run, stop the pass. But apparently, Lamar just went into hyperspeed or hyper mode and teed off on him. But let's see. And then for Hawk Pockets, Janie Daniels. I mean, 209 yards, 2 touchdowns, 8 carries, 35 yards, 23.86 fantasy points. Gets the Giants again. I think he had 20-something against them last time, too. And then Bijan Robinson. 19 carries, 86 yards, 7 receptions for 59 yards for 21.50 fantasy points. This is how it should be with like Christian McCaffrey type numbers like they said they were going to do. And then Mondre Stevenson. He did not run the ball at all very well. And we could see that here. Tennessee's defense is stifles against the run. 16 yards rushing, but he did score a touchdown against us. And then 5 receptions, 38 yards, and a touchdown there on a ridiculous play. I will give Drake May credit, though. He did what he could to fight and then throw up a duck. We should have defended that and knocked it down. But Stevenson ended up being there and catching it for the touchdown to tie the game and take the game into overtime. Then Tennessee kicked the field goal, made it through the interception, game over. Worthy, in this case, I don't know if I'd start him anymore in this case, just based on DeAndre Hopkins is there now. And 2 carries for 10 yards and no receptions for -1 points. Jerry Jeudy, again, benefiting definitely for Jameis Winston and Cooper being gone. 7 for 73 against a tough, I think they're top 3, I think, overall defense, like when it comes to stats and stuff like that. But 14.30 fantasy points there. 10 targets for Dalton Kincaid and only 4 receptions for 32 yards. That's kind of not great. But, I mean, it's nice, encouraging to see that the targets are actually going there, which is kind of nice. And then Pittman against Minnesota. Usually, Minnesota, like, they give up a lot against for fantasy points, touchdowns, and receiving yards. And you think in this case, when Flacco's on there, he targets Downs and he targets Pittman. So you think Pittman, right in that lineup, would be like a cakewalk, should be double-digit fantasy points easy. I would think about 15, but unfortunately that is not the case. Downs did have a good game, but Pittman did not. McManus missed 1 field goal. It wouldn't have mattered anyway, but and then hit his other 2 field goals as well for 5 fantasy points. Then Cleveland's defense with 11.22 fantasy points. And then in this game here, I just want to check something before we start. Okay, check something before we start. Mm-hmm. All right. So in this game, we had Gritty Fly defeat Game Over For You, 144.88 to 135.40. And I thought I remember him, Gritty Fly. Yeah, because I think Gritty Fly has Kelsey in his lineup. And Kelsey teed off that game. And again, you want to attack the tight ends also for for Tampa against Tampa. That's why I had. I'm not gonna lie. I had in my free DraftKings lineup. I had Travis Kelce pairing with Pat Mahomes. So, but anyway, game over for you. Lamar Jackson came back. Didn't know if he was going to play this week. Wasn't, yeah, but still, I mean, he did pretty well. 280 yards, 3 touchdowns. Did get sacked once. 3 carries, 4 yards for 28.60 fantasy points, and a dominating performance. Breece Hall, 15 for 74, which is actually pretty good on the run. And then 2 receptions for 11 yards in their win here. Travis Etienne against Philly's defense, 3 for 24, 2 receptions for 6 yards. It seems like something is still bothering him. That's what I'm getting on this, because we know how Etienne is. Etienne is good. Doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. He'll catch passes up the backfield, turn into something good. Maybe the running comes down a little bit, but he's still in that point where it's like, dude, feed this guy the ball. Like, he's good. And then Hopkins. Said Hopkins is now the main target. They traded for a receiver. They lost so many receivers. Traded for him. 8 receptions, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns for 28.60 fantasy points. And then Brian Thomas playing like he banged up all week. Decided to still play. 2 for 22. Did get the 2-point conversion for 6.20 fantasy points and an almost upset win there. Then Taysom Hill benefited as well with Olave being out. He did get 5 carries for 19 yards, and then a touchdown on the left side, then 4 receptions for 41 yards as well for 60 fantasy points. Is that going to repeat? I don't know. I will want it to repeat because everyone loves Taysom Hill. But it might due to Olave being out still. But then again, the coach is fired. Dennis Allen's fired. We don't know how that's going to work out. And then Dowdle had his breakout game. 12 for 75, 5 for 32, and a touchdown. So if you guys started Dowdle your fantasy leagues, props to you. And then, of course, Zeke being out. I mean, Dalvin Cook didn't really do anything, and of course, it was his time. But with 9 fantasy points here, with a couple of field goals, a few extra points, and their win over the Giants. And then Chicago's defense with 9.80 fantasy points. And then for Gritty Fly, Justin Herbert's at 282, 2 touchdowns. He'll be very efficient. 17.48 fantasy points in their win over Cleveland. Bones Walker with 83 yards rushing, 3 receptions for 24 yards for 13.70 fantasy points. Again, really good game towards the game, overtime game there. Swift, I thought, would do more against Arizona, but I mean, you got to pass to keep up. He did have 16 carries, 51 yards, and he did get 6 receptions for 31 yards out the backfield. So, and then Justin Jefferson had the completion to Aaron Jones for a nice game for 22 yards. He did also have 7 for 137 yards. Now, Indy's defense, pretty solid, but still, it's Justin Jefferson. He's going to have his games. But 22.58 fantasy points, still light work, basically. Lockett's, I think Metcalf was out. And Lockett, I mean, bounced back 3 for 63 and a touchdown. And yep, here's Kelce here. 14 receptions, 100 yards, and had the 1 fumble loss. But got the bonus point as well. And yeah, for 24 fantasy points. Keenan Allen, 10 targets, but only turned out 4 for 36 for 7.60 fantasy points. And then McPherson, couple field goals, hit all of his extra points for 12 fantasy points. And then Chargers defense against Cleveland, balled out for 18.02 fantasy points. Then unfinished business with a win over Bird of Bites, 121.32 to 55.45. Jordan Love, I think he didn't do great. You could tell something was bothering him. I understand he has that mindset too, like a lot of us were taught in high school, where it's like you get injured, like you still want to play though, and it's like, no, I still want to play for this team, and it's like, wow, inspiring and stuff. But I mean, Detroit's defense is good, yes, but like to enough where they beat the Packers, I don't think so. But in this case, I mean, 273, 2-point conversion, didn't throw for any touchdowns, didn't rush for any yards. I'm sure fully healthy, like they will bounce back, and I think it'd be a different result. Cook, 10 for 44, and then 5 receptions for 25 yards. Didn't get in the end zone, but still finished with double-digit fantasy points at 11.90. Kyren Williams had a down game here. I mean, 22 for 69 yards, a little over 3 yards a carry. And a reception for 26 yards for 10.50 fantasy points. I didn't think the rushing game, I thought would have been fine here because I think they're pretty bad against the run in general, like when it comes to fantasy points and things. But this game, I mean, turned around. St. Brown, 7 for 56 and a touchdown here for 18.60 fantasy points. And then Jakobi Meyers with him back, of course, got to be the number one target. 8 for 105 and then the bonus point on top of that for 19.50 fantasy points. Evan Ingram, 5 for 45 yards against Philly, and then the 2-point conversion. Chase Brown, I had a feeling Chase Brown was going off this week, even with or without Zach Moss in the lineup, but he totally went off this game. 27 carries, 120 yards. Got the bonus point for that. 5 receptions, 37 yards, and a touchdown on top of that for 27.70 fantasy points. Myers, only a couple extra points, missed the 1 extra point. And then the Titans defense here for 12.70 fantasy points. And then for Bird abides, Kyler Murray, Chicago's defense. I mean, yes, they're good against the pass, but not good against the run. Like you kind of want to run on them in a way, but like they're still good. Don't get me wrong. But 154 yards. I thought Kyler Murray would have done better this game. 154 yards. Did lose a fumble. Was sacked in the backfield a few times. Gibbs, I don't know if that was part of the plan. I mean, he didn't start off that way. It just seemed like Montgomery. Like every time you look on the feed, it's Montgomery. But in this case, I mean, still 11 carries, 65 yards, a touchdown, and then a reception for 11 yards. Still pretty good. It's still the best running back duo. I mean, 14.60 fantasy points. It's still the best running back duo we got in the league right now, and there's a reason why. And then because of bye weeks and stuff, Ford had to start. I thought he would get around 5 points. He didn't. 2 carries, 5 yards, reception for 2 yards. Marvin Harrison, 2 for 34. They bottled him up, had the 1 fumble loss, but 4.40 fantasy points. Waddle, 2 receptions, -4 yards. Did have a touchdown, though, for 7.60 fantasy points. Kyle Pitts, it's like, yeah, he's doing good, and it's gone. And 1 reception for 11 yards, 2.10 fantasy points. DJ Moore, 4 for 33, 7.30 fantasy points. I'm sure you guys saw where Caleb Williams trying to continue to play. It looked like when Moore went out the field on the one play, because I'm sure you guys have seen it, where they highlight the circles and they show what he's doing. I don't know. I don't know if he thought that the play was over, but it did look like he came up limping too and went and sat on the bench because of it. I don't think he had any idea. I know he's been frustrating, but I don't know if that's too connected or not. But and then Fairbairn here missed a couple field goals this game. Those were, I don't know if they would have won anything, but definitely would have gotten a lot more fantasy points in this one. And then New England's defense, I don't blame them there. Like I would have played New England's defense too. 7.99 fantasy points as well. Garrett and the Jets looks like defeated Wishnowsky in this week's game of the week, 143.58 to 107.82. Caleb Williams, Wishnowsky, 217 yards, 5 yards rushing, got sacked a lot. They need to protect him a little bit better. It sounds like just looking at it, he's going through his ups and downs. He's cold, then he's hot, then he's cold again, and maybe he might be hot again. Who knows? And then Mixon, I was thinking Mixon would get the majority of the carries this week, which 24 carries, it just seems like a normal day. 106 yards and a touchdown. Tried the trick play, didn't really work. Um, but I thought he would get receptions out the backfield due to Stefon Diggs leaving. Usually, when that happens, when like a receiver's gone or whatnot, usually a lot of those vacated targets go to the running back, which I thought it would be a 20-point game for Mixon. But unfortunately, that's not the case, and we'll see what happens this week. Chuba Hubbard, 15 for 72, 2 touchdowns, had a couple receptions for 0 yards, but 21.20 fantasy points in the upset win over New Orleans. Neighbors, 9 catches for 59 yards, 14.90 fantasy points. I mean, last time against him, he had a touchdown, and he had touchdowns, I think. But in this case, it wasn't. The passing game wasn't really on point. It's not his fault. And then Davante Adams, we finally see a touchdown for Davante Adams. It's kind of like, man, we missed that little Aaron Rodgers, like Rodgers to Adams connection. 7 receptions, 91 yards, and a touchdown against him. Dalton Schultz thought would get more of the work as well. He only had 3 for 21, but for 5.10 fantasy points. CeeDee Lamb got hurt this game too, but he was on his way to do his thing. 15 yards rushing, 8 for 47, 2-point conversion on top of that. Carlson didn't sign a kicker as a buy, so they'll be fine for this week. Washington's defense here, I would have played them against the Giants too in this case, but only 7.54 fantasy points. And then for Garrett and the Jets, Josh Allen doing Josh Allen things. 235 yards, 3 touchdowns, a 2-point conversion. Couple carries, 7 yards. 28.10 fantasy points. Side note, I have seen a lot of they're already seeing who's going to be the MVP, and it seems like Josh Allen is leading the front again. That's not my choice. Not my choice for that. The guys who have been dominating to me, it's either Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, or Jaden Daniels. That's who I would think the 3 would be. In this situation, yes, they've seen what Allen can do. He's gone to Shakir a lot. He's actually played pretty well without his top receivers. Then they go get him a receiver, and he's still playing pretty well, even when his receiver has not. But it's just been, Derrick Henry changed that team, in my opinion. But still, that inspired Lamar Jackson to go and do his thing. But then you got Jaden Daniels, who has basically turned the last place team into a first place team, basically a 2-7 team to a 7-2 team, and they don't know what to do against him. But that's besides the point. It's only midway through the season. Anything can happen. Anything can change. So Nick Chubb, only 15 carries, 39 yards, still looking pretty rough out there. But then again, we're reception negative 4 yards for 4.50 fantasy points. Still looking a little rough. But then again, he came back from a gruesome injury that nobody should ever come back from, and he's defying the odds basically at this point. Pollard didn't know if he was going to play this week. He didn't really practice much this week. He played anyway, still dominated against him. You want to attack New England on the run for sure. Lead all the categories you want to say when it comes to running. And giving up a lot of rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, fantasy points, etc., whatever stat it is. For 19.40 fantasy points. 128 yards rushing, 3 receptions, 26 yards, dominating performance. A.J. Brown got hurt this game, otherwise he was going to be doing pretty well this game. 2 for 36, only 5.60 fantasy points. Garrett Wilson had himself a game. Q to defy my impressions of him. I thought he would go down when it comes to fantasy points. That is not the case. He becomes more unstoppable. 9 for 90 and 2 touchdowns for 30 fantasy points. And then McBride's still doing his thing. The odds of McBride getting a rushing touchdown, again, that's not on my bingo card. 3 receptions for 35 yards there. But then again, they had to do something against this team. Well, actually, no, they didn't have to do anything. They won this game. They basically played with their food. And then Zay Flowers doing Zay Flowers things. I thought Deontay Johnson would have had an impact in a way. But they said when they came out like the start that he would be capped on his snaps due to learning the playbook. And Flowers had a nice move for the one touchdown. I don't know if you guys saw that, but um, 5 for 127 and 2 touchdowns for 30.70 fantasy points. He also got that bonus too on top of that. Then McLaughlin, 7 fantasy points, so 1 field goal, a few extra points. And then New Orleans defense would have played New Orleans defense against Carolina the way the Carolina's been playing. 5.58 fantasy points. And then for the last matchup of the evening, we had Saquon defeating Hurts, 132.62 to 129.21. Came down to Harrison Butker this game. That I know for sure. But in this case, tough matchup. 40-yard field goal basically put him ahead by I think 0.5 or something like that. But then the other extra points and stuff after that. CJ Stroud, figured he wasn't going to have a good game. I know, when your receivers are gone, you're depleted. You can only do so much. They did drive the ball down the field, though. They did drive it down the field. They ran the ball pretty well. That was probably the best thing, was running against the Jets. But still, 191 yards passing, 8 carries, 59 yards. Again, didn't catch the trick play, but he was sacked a lot back there. 8 sacks. I didn't realize it was that much, but it was a lot. And then Barkley doing Barkley things. You want to run against Jacksonville. Basically, you want to do everything against Jacksonville. 159 yards and a touchdown, 3 receptions for 40 yards and a touchdown. Got the 1 lost fumble for 34.90 fantasy points. And then the sick reverse hurdle that he had. Josh Jacobs, didn't know if he was going to play this week, but then he came back and said he was going to play. 95 yards against Detroit, against number 1 Detroit, I believe number 1 against the run. And then 2 for 13 yards. Still did pretty good. And still defies our expectations of this guy should not be good, but here he is. He's good. And then Devontae Smith, again with the 1 sick touchdown catch. He had 4 for 87, a touchdown for 18.70 fantasy points. Benefited much when A.J. Brown went down. And then Downs started as well, 6 for 60 for 12 fantasy points. Mark Andrews, 2 for 26, again an up and down, but it's Denver, so 4.6 fantasy points to give him a pass in this situation. J.K. Dobbins should not have had a good game, but he did. 85 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then 2 for 20. Harrison Butker for 7 fantasy points. The 1 40-yard field goal, and then the 40-plus field goal, and then the 3 extra points. Baltimore's defense, pretty good against Denver here, 13.58 fantasy points. And then for Hurts QB, 230 yards, 2 touchdowns, had the 67 yards rushing, had the 1 touchdown, sacked a few times, but 30.90 fantasy points. Derrick Henry, he teed off as well, 106 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, and then a 1 reception for 27 yards. David Montgomery, 17 for 73, 3 for 23, and for 12.6 touchdown fantasy points. And the streak is over. No more touchdowns. No touchdowns this week. So usually it's an automatic touchdown, but not in this case. And then Chase, 7 for 43, 11.30 fantasy points here in their win. Leggett was the main guy, basically, since Deontay Johnson's gone. Thielen's not back yet. Let's see what he can do. And he had 4 for 33 and a touchdown. I had him in the free DraftKings lineup I had. And he didn't cost, he hardly cost anything. I was like, dude, this is an easy pick. Definitely got my value on that. Njoku, 5 for 29 for 7.90 fantasy points. Tolberts had to start this game here. But still, 3 for 19 and a touchdown this for 10.90 fantasy points. I mean, a lot of teams are on the bye, so you got to play. Elliott missed a 1 field goal, but, I mean, he did just enough for them to win. And 1 extra point. And then the Eagles defense for 10.41 fantasy points. Then for the weekly report, got the best scoring team was Amarico, 147.49 points. And the worst scoring team was Brandon Bides for 55.45 fantasy points. For the starting players, starters of the week, Joe Burrow led all the quarterbacks with 35.14 fantasy points. Saquon led all the running backs for 34.90 fantasy points. Zay Flowers led all receivers for 30.70 fantasy points. Travis Kelce led all tight ends for 24 fantasy points. McPherson led all kickers for 12 fantasy points. And then the Chargers led all the defenses for 18.02 fantasy points. And then for the starting bench warmers, you had excuse me here. Like Tua for 20. No, you had Pat Mahomes for 26.54 fantasy points. You got Austin Eckler leading all the running backs for 17.30 fantasy points. JSN led all receivers for 38 fantasy points. Ferguson led all the tight ends with 14.10 fantasy points. Nobody had any kickers starting. Nobody had any kickers on the bench besides Iverson. 0 fantasy points. And then the Jets led all defenses with 15.62 fantasy points. When it comes to league awards here, Which Nasty, the most efficient manager this week, only 107.82 fantasy points, but 100% on the dot. And the least efficient manager looks like it's Birds and Bides here. Also picks up the underachiever award with 55.45 fantasy points, and less than his projection of 103.45. Highest points and loss goes to Game Over For You with 135.40, the 9-point loss. Lowest points in the win goes to Unfinished Business, 121 fantasy points. Also had the biggest blowout in this case with the 60-point blowout. And then for narrow victory, we go to Saquon with a few point win over Hurts. And then for Overachiever, it looks like we got Gritty Fly with 144.88 compared to 113 he had. All right. And then just going over the standings here real quick in the first division for BO Railroad. We got Game Over For You and Unfinished Business leading at 5 and 4, followed by Ricky Bobby at 4 and 5. Then we have Hot Pockets and Bird of Bides leading at 4 and 5, and followed by Gritty Fly at 3 and 6. And then for Short Line Railroad, we have America leading at 6 and 3, followed by Saquon at 5 and 4, and Which Nasty at 3 and 6. And then for Reading Railroad, we have Hurts leading the way at 6 and 3, followed by Gary and the Jets at 5 and 4, and Big Papa at 4 and 5. Now I took all the wins, the losses, points for, points against, and threw it all together into a formula, and it generates a power ranking score. So here are the power rankings for week number 10. Number 1 spot, we got America with 1.19, moving up 2 spots from 3. Then we got Hurts second at 1.17, moving down a spot. We got Garrett and the Jets at 1.09 at the 3rd spot, moving up a spot to 3. We have Game Over For You with 1.08, moving down 2 spots to 4. We have Unfinished Business at 1.07, moving up 1 spot to 5. We got Saquon at 1.05, moving up 1 spot to 6. We have Ricky Bobby at 0.95, moving up 3 spots to 7. We have Hot Pockets at 0.94, moving down 3 spots to 8. We have Big Papa at Big Papa and Birds of Bides finished at 0.91. However, with the tiebreaker score, Big Papa stays in 9th, and Bird of Bides drops down 2 spots to 10th. Gritty Fly for Bike Guy and Which Nasty both have 0.82 for the score. Due to the tiebreaker, Gritty Fly moves up a spot to 11, and Which Nasty moves down a spot to 12. All right, and week 10 matchups here. We got Big Papa taking on Saquon. We've got Ricky Bobby taking off Gritty Fly for Bike Guy. We got Game Over For You taking on Birds of Bites. We got Unfinished Business taking on Hot Pockets. America taking on Garrett and the Jets. And Hurts taking on Which Nasty. If I had to pick a game for this week, I would go Ricky Bobby taking on Gritty Fly for a Vet Guy. Nice 4 or 5 matchup. Take a look at some of the matchups here. And stuff will be switched around, but I think this one could be a sneaky high scoring affair, even though these guys do score a lot of points. So that's why I see it happening that way. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you like to, leave a like, subscribe. Good luck, everyone. Good luck on your fantasy teams. May the odds ever be in your favor. And on to week number 10. See you later.